I think we got it. That was the best one. Okay, we got it. Nailed it. Ben from Chef's Edge here. We are back again today. We're going to be talking about carbon steel and stainless steel blades and which one might be the best for you. Japanese knives will fall into two main categories. You have carbon steel and stainless steel. Now there are a few grey areas in and around that I'm going to explain later, but for the better part, those are the two main knife steels we're going to be talking about today. Now let's cover the exciting ones first. We're going to put away the stainless steel knife and we're going to go straight into the carbon steel. When we talk about a carbon steel knife, we're talking about a steel that has around about between 0.1 and 2% carbon by total weight and generally lacks any stainless properties. Now by comparison, when you're walking around the homeware stores and you see the Japanese knives, I'm not going to name any names, those will often have around 0.3% carbon. A traditional carbon steel like Blue 2 will have around 1 to 1.2-ish% carbon, almost 4 times the amount. That makes a massive difference when you're talking about the hardness of the steel and how long that knife's going to stay sharp for. Now a higher carbon content allows the blacksmith to take that steel to much higher hardness, and that is going to result in much longer lasting sharpness compared to your off-the-shelf knives. Now, to higher hardness, your knife will become brittle. To lower hardness, your knife will blunt really quickly. And carbon is the special sauce that makes that happen. As you'll probably find out, there is a bit of a cost to benefit ratio when it comes to knife hardness, and we'll explain more on that a little bit later. Now, before I get too carried away nerding out about knife steel, let's get into the most commonly found Japanese carbon steels. You'll find the two most common carbon steels used in Japanese knives are Aogami and Shirogami. Aogami and Shirogami, they both directly translate to blue paper and white paper. Now they're given those names because of the color packaging that they arrive from factory, blue paper for blue paper steel, and you guessed it, white paper for white paper steel. So let's put the Aogami away first and quickly just talk about the Shirogami. The Shirogami is from Hado knife in Sakai. I'm sure I will talk about these later on in another video. Shirogami, there's a couple of different variations of Shirogami. There is a white 1, a white 2, and a white 3. But for now, I'm just going to talk about white steel as a whole. A white steel is a very pure carbon steel. It is probably the easiest to rust, but it's also the easiest to sharpen. For those of you out there that may have already used a Shirogami knife and copped a very unpleasant surprise after you left it wet on the cutting board, yes, there is a reason for that. Those have no stainless properties in them whatsoever. If you're thinking about getting into a carbon steel knife and want something very easy to sharpen, then a white steel knife might be for you. To be mindful that if you do leave those wet on the cutting board, they're going to rust pretty quick. And trust me, it is not nice. It's happened to me a couple of times, just a couple. And quickly, when we're talking about carbon steel knives, I'm just going to throw in the HRC, which is the Rockwell Hardness Scale. Now you'll find that a lot of workable knife steels fall around 55 to 65. That is kind of the workable range, generally speaking. White steels will sometimes sit around 62 to 63. Obviously there's a couple of variations with those, but around about 62-ish on the hardness scale, which is still very hard knife, still very easy to sharpen. And just with white steel knives, remember, oiling after use is going to prevent that surface rust from occurring. And we have had a few instances of people putting their knives up on the magnetic rack and right above the kettle. When they turn the kettle on, obviously the steam comes up. Water sitting on your carbon steel knife is not a good thing if it's not oiled. Actually, it's not a good thing at all, to be honest. But be mindful, keep away from sources of moisture, oil your blade after use, and generally you should be fine. Okay, so Shirogami, done. Aogami, probably the most common carbon steel that you will find in Japanese knives. It is a little less prone to rusting than white steel. It has a little bit of rust resistance, but again, not much. It will still rust if you leave it wet on the cutting board. Blue steel is generally forgiving to work with if you're a blacksmith, so you'll find that a lot of the carbon steel knives in Japan will be made with a variant of blue carbon steel. It's not an overly expensive carbon steel either, so being not overly expensive, fairly easy to work with, you'll find a lot of Japanese knives will be made with blue carbon steel. It's also got very good robustness, very good edge retention. It's still very easy to sharpen if the steel's been heat treated properly. Generally speaking, Blue 2 carbon steel is going to be a fantastic choice for your first carbon steel knife if you don't mind just that little bit of extra maintenance. Hardness for blue steels, obviously you have a Blue 1 and a Blue 2. I don't believe there's a Blue 3. Workable hardness for those is around 61 up to 64, depending on which variant. So you have Blue 1, Blue 2, and there is also Blue Super Steel. Blue Super Steel is basically an upgraded version of Blue 2. You'll find that this is a little bit more difficult to sharpen. It has even more carbon than Blue 2, but it also has really good edge retention. You'll find that despite that really good edge retention, it can still develop a little bit of surface rust if you're not careful. But Blue Super, when it's heat treated properly, is one of the best knife steels that you can use. Now, when we're talking about carbon steel knives, we cannot forget to mention the patina. The patina is oxidization on the outside of the steel. Your nice, new, shiny, perfect looking knife will basically never look like this again. Now that's because these knives lack any stainless properties, or they have very, very few. Much like a carbon steel wax, these knives will develop a patina over time, which is basically a bluish, purplish, reddish kind of tinge over the blade. And you will notice that blue, purple, red hue will then gradually darken and darken and basically turn into a gray or black over time. The patina is a good thing. This just means your knife is forming that protective layer on the outside of the steel, and that's actually going to make it less prone to rusting later on down the line. I'm going to quickly deviate from the carbon and stainless steels. You will notice Sanmai pop up a lot. Almost all knives are made with Sanmai, which is basically 3-layered construction. We'll have, let's see if I can get it to focus there. If it doesn't, and you can only see my face, I'm terribly sorry. You will have 3 layers. Your 3 layers are the core steel here. This core steel in most cases will run from there all the way up to the spine. You will then see the foggy layer here and the flat at the top. That is 1 layer of steel here. This is 1 layer of steel here at the edge, and on the reverse side, it's exactly the same. When you look down the blade this way, you've got a layer of soft iron on the side, usually for carbon steel knives, a soft iron layer here, and then your cutting edge straight down the middle. The Moritaka is also made with Sanmai. You have soft iron layer on the outside here, and then you've also got the bright core steel, which is the Blue 2 carbon cutting edge. Now this knife here by Hado, because we've got no section here, which is called the Karachi finish, the raw scale from the forge. Blades like this that have no Karachi finish will obviously be more reactive along the entire blade, whereas the Moritaka here, you'll actually have a little bit of protection through here. Even though this layer is soft iron, you will notice that this will be actually quite difficult to rust in the early stages. Over time, this black will fade off. Now, probably my favorite variation of the Sanmai construction is the combination of carbon and stainless steel. Now we have stainless steel on the outside, and you guessed it, carbon steel on the cutting edge. This is Matsubara's Blue 2 stainless clad option. You'll notice that having a carbon steel clad in stainless steel is a godsend for maintenance. So you really only need to be concerned about keeping that core steel dry. Give it a very light coat of oil if you want to be extra careful, but you'll notice that this here is not reactive. Only your core carbon cutting steel will patina and oxidize over time. Plus, it also looks pretty awesome to have all stainless steel up the side and a nice black set in patina on the cutting edge once you've built that patina up over years and years of use. So if you want to get into a carbon steel blade, Blue 2 stainless clad is a great option to get started. Now, digressing over, let's get into the stainless steels. The 2 most common Japanese stainless steels you'll find are VG10 and Ginsan, or Jinsan, whichever you want to call it. I'll quickly just cover VG10. Now this is a VG10 bunker from Suncraft. Now VG10 as a stainless steel is a really good option if you're just getting started. Around about 1% carbon, which makes it a high carbon stainless steel. A lot of chromium, a few added extra elements for toughness. Now these knives are generally considered to be really good starter knives. VG10 not quite as cheap as it used to be. When it's heat treated correctly, it can be very easy to sharpen. It has great edge retention, corrosion resistance, toughness. This is generally an all-round really good steel, which is why you'll find it in a lot of Japanese knives. VG10 on the hardness scale generally sits around 60 to 61, so close to carbon steel, but not quite. Now another highly underrated Japanese stainless steel is Jinsan. Now Jinsan is a high carbon stainless, has just over 1% of carbon, so a little higher than VG10, but it sharpens up very, very easily, almost similar to white carbon steel. It's a very pure stainless steel. You'll find that Jinsan sits about 60 to 61 on the hardness scale as well. Similar to carbon, but not quite there. Now Jinsan contains about 14% chromium, which makes it a stainless steel. But with that high carbon content, you've got something that kind of behaves like carbon steel in terms of edge retention, in terms of overall sharpness, durability, how long that is going to stay sharp for. But then you've also got the added benefit of being a stainless steel blade. So if you do see a Jinsan for a good price, highly, highly underrated steel, not as common as VG10 either, and personally one of my favorite stainless steels. Now there is another fairly commonly used stainless steel. It is Oz 8 or Oz 10, except I forgot to bring my Oz 8, Oz 10 knives with me today. Yes, pretty dumb, I know. So you're just gonna have to imagine an Oz 8 knife here that looks like the FKM from my website. I'm also gonna put a link to that one in the description. Oz 8, Oz 10 are generally a little softer. They're more considered the commercial workhorse kind of kitchen knives, around about 58 to 59 on the hardness scale. Good all-round stainless steel, very easy to sharpen, great if you're getting into Japanese knives and you need a beginner level knife. The FKM series is a great place to start. Now, I mentioned before that there was a grey area around carbon and stainless steels. Now, we have got a couple of options that are semi-stainless, like SKD, you will find from, say, Yoshikane, for example. Very, very fine grained semi-stainless steel. Excellent edge retention, really, really easy to sharpen. You've got some corrosion resistance. It's not a fully stainless blade, but they are semi-stainless, so you will notice they're quite forgiving if you do leave them wet. They're not going to rust straight away like a carbon steel blade. But SKD I find to be a great combination between some stainless and some carbon properties. Now, getting on to perhaps one of my favorites are what's called the powdered stainless steels. Powdered stainless steels are a very, very high carbon stainless steel. So you get all of the benefits of carbon with all the benefits of stainless. Now, the trade-off for being so awesome is that they do become a little brittle because these knives are very, very hard. You will find a lot of these are ground very, very thin at the edge. When you have a very thin, very hard knife steel, those will become more brittle. If you go full force into seeds, bones, anything like that, generally the rule of thumb is if you don't chew it, don't cut it. But if you do happen to cut it, you will probably chip your knife. Probably one of the most commonly used powdered stainless steels in Japanese knife making, and probably my favorite steel overall, is R2 or SG2. Now, this is a very high carbon content stainless steel. It is about 1.4% carbon. So again, almost 40% more carbon than VG10 and any of the other carbon steels. Very, very hard knife making steel. These sit usually around 63 to 65 on the hardness scale. With an R2 SG2 knife, you will find you basically get all the benefits of carbon steel with all of the benefits of having a stainless steel blade. And value for money, Takamura's SG2 is some of the best you can get. Now, there are a couple of other powdered stainless steels that I don't have with me today. There are HAP 40, which is a very, very hard powdered stainless steel, generally sitting around HRC 65. HAP 40 is it's notoriously difficult to sharpen. You will need to start on a lower grit, like a 400 grit, just to get your burr moving and get that apex refined on your edge. HAP 40 generally not recommended for your first knife. And then you've also got basically the king of the knife steels, which is ZDP 189. Now, this is a very, very hard knife making steel. It's got over 2% of carbon, which is just crazy. Also very corrosion resistant. The hardness of this blade can go up to 65 to 67 HRC, which is just crazy. These knives will stay sharp for a very, very long time, at the cost of obviously being more brittle and quite a pain to sharpen. So to summarize all of that, if you want to go for a carbon steel knife, generally the most common and cost effective you will find will be Blue 2 carbon steel, easy to sharpen, not too reactive. Get one with a Kurachi finish so it's not overly hard to maintain. Keep it dry and you should be fine. And as for stainless steels, VG10 or Jinsan are going to be great performers for your first knife. Personally, I would lean towards Jinsan just because it's a lot easier to sharpen. I find it easier to sharpen personally, and often you'll find these for a great price as well. And if you wanted something a little special, SG2 powdered stainless steel from Takamura will not break the bank, very easy to sharpen, crazy good edge retention, but you just need to be mindful of not cutting anything too hard. No bones, no seeds, no frozen stuff. And that's pretty much it. I hope you learned something today. If you have any questions, comments, leave them down below and let us know what kind of videos you want us to make next. I'll see you next time.